Coming to you live from the Garage of Solitude here in Whitestone, Queens, I am Mario Francisco Robles, and this is the Superman on Film post-show live stream for Season 4, Episode 6 of Superman and Lois. Welcome to the show. Sorry I had to miss last week. Real life did get in the way, and I have some exciting announcements about one of the new arrivals to the Robles household, but I'm going to save that for this week's proper show. The proper episode this week for Superman on Film will be James Gunn's Influences, Volume 1. It's going to be a full-on look at the current movie that is coming out next year and a deep dive on some of the influences that James Gunn has referenced on social media so far and in interviews. I'm going to be doing a few of those in the lead up to the film. But on that show, I have a big announcement about a new arrival to the Robles family. And he kept me very busy last week, and it stopped me from getting to do the show. But now, alas, here we are. Welcome. I'm very excited to be talking about this freaking TV show. Superman and Lois once again knocked it out of the park. Just some thoughts on last week's episode since I didn't get around to sharing them at the time. It was amazing to have him back. To me, it was a little bit jarring how quickly it happened. I really kind of thought we were going to milk the death a little bit longer, or that his return to life was going to be a little bit more dramatic, let's say. It went from literally he woke up at the end of the last episodes, and now here he is in civilian clothing, hugging Lois and the boys, and it's like he's back. So it happened a little alarmingly quick, if you're asking me. But I'm not going to complain. It was great to have Superman back. The training sequences between him and Jonathan were so cool, especially when you juxtapose it to the training that he did with Jordan. When he took Jordan to go do the same flying lessons in the same area, it didn't go as smoothly. And Clark had made a Star Wars reference to doing the Kessel Run, and that went right over Jordan's head. But Jonathan instantly got it, and he came back with a parsecs joke. And, I want to just kind of pause right there. One of the great things that Tyler Hoechlin's Superman, his portrayal of Superman and Clark, he nails so well is, you notice his Clark Kent is very different from his Superman, but his Clark Kent is not some bumbling, goofy idiot. You know what I mean? In the Christopher Reeve movies, and this is not a knock, it worked for those films, but they sort of established this idea that the only way you could distinguish them is to make one of them Superman and one of them kind of a big, oafish, bumbling idiot. And what I like about this is that the way Tyler plays Clark, he's a little more like geeky. You get to see his more just vulnerable, excitable side, like the way he reacted when Jonathan shot him back, the Star Wars reference back last week. It was just great. He got so giddy that his son got it. And in general, like when you go back to the earlier seasons when he's like an assistant coach on the football team, you see this more he's got like a more playful energy, and he's more aw shucks, but he's not a complete kind of goof who can't walk a straight line without bumping into something. He found a nice way to differentiate his Clark from his Superman without making his Clark a moron. And it was fun watching him train Jonathan. And, that scene, though, it brought to light one of the big question marks that I had when they presented this idea of putting Sam Lane's heart inside of Superman's chest, where it's like, well, we've already established that a Kryptonian heart is different, that it beats 3 times instead of twice, and that it's just, it's even though we resemble Kryptonians, we are not biologically the same as Kryptonians. So as soon as they introduced this idea of putting a 60-year-old human heart inside of Clark's chest, we had to know that this is not going to go smoothly, and I remember on the last stream kind of wondering if does this mean now that we're going to get a more mortal Superman. What if he's got all the powers, but now he can be hurt a little more? And maybe now he will start to age alongside Lois. And he won't just be an immortal who lives on forever, but rather he's a little more closer to being one of us now. He's going to actually age and one day pass on. And I thought it might be an interesting angle to give Superman this idea of he was once going to be this immortal being that was going to probably watch everyone around him die one day, and he was going to outlive us all and be this lonely being. But now he gets to be one of us, and I know it's a little bittersweet because we like our Superman to be super, and I don't like hearing that his heart has problems and he crashed and almost had like a little bit of it almost seemed like a heart attack there in front of Jonathan. I don't like the idea of him being suddenly this weak, but I'm thinking, it's still early days. He just got this heart. He's going to get into a groove, and he's going to, maybe they're going to show that the scar does heal eventually, and he'll be at full power. I just, it's a little hard to watch Superman weak and struggling, especially since he just got killed. You want to see him come roaring back. I'll never forget reading the Return of Superman comic arc all those years ago. And, when he finally came back, he was back in all his glory. And in this storyline, he comes back and things aren't quite the same, and he's a little bit off his game, and he's a little bit on his feet, on his heels. And it's just, it's a different feel for this return to life, But yeah, we definitely, they started diving into that a little bit last week. But I got to say, the effects look great, don't they? This series, we know it's for the CW. Anyone who's looked at Arrowverse shows over the years knows how those shows have often not looked so hot. Those shows have very often looked like a bunch of people running around in Party City costumes in Vancouver and in front of somebody's YouTube green screen backdrop, doing their very best on a very limited budget. And listen, we give them credit. But those shows very rarely looked like Hollywood level. You know what I mean? But the effect so far this season and throughout this whole series, they've never skimped. They've always found ways to cut corners elsewhere so that the super stuff looks truly super. So showing from the training sequences last week to his confrontation with the fire-armed goon, which was a great little callback to Superman Returns when he's walking towards the guy who's shooting at him. They totally revisited that when he's getting shot at with fire in that last episode. Just like this week, they revisited something with Jonathan where I think that was also last week when he was walking through the fire trying to rescue the woman who was in that mall. It looked just like when Henry Cavill was walking through the fire at the oil refinery scene in the beginning of Man of Steel. That's what I love about this show. It has visual references and Easter eggs to like all of Superman. You know what I mean? It doesn't just try to reference one particular prior project. Certain Superman projects in the past, they hitch their wagon almost entirely to certain references to a certain universe. But watching Superman and Lois, like you feel like you're getting references from every iteration of Superman ever. But I love all those little nods, and the show is just so good. But if I have one nitpick, is that when Jonathan is walking through that fire, his clothes should burn, okay? His clothes are not made of Kryptonian fabric. He's not wearing a super suit. So when he was just walking through this wall of fire in a hoodie and jeans, I'm like, all right, I get it. He's super. He doesn't have to be too worried about the flames. But the whole thing should be catching fire, not just his shoulder, But that's just a little nitpick. But bringing us to this week's episode, Break the Cycle. I love it. Just, the title right off the bat, thematically, I was wondering where they were going with this, because I know the parenting idea of breaking the cycle when you are a child of an abusive home or you come from some sort of tough upbringing. And this idea of a lot of people, they either repeat the cycle, right? They either in some way or other repeat what happened to them and they relitigate that onto their kids, and the pattern lives on. But then you have the people who become very conscious of what happened to them, who do the work and understand, oh, that's why I did what I did. And they make an active choice to break the cycle. They go, I'm not going to let what happened to me influence what happened to my kids. I'm going to be better. I'm going to make sure that the sins of my family's past, that all ends here. That ends with me. The next generation will remain pure and perfect. And I knew that so the concept of breaking the cycle to me is a powerful one, and it's one I talk about with friends of mine all the time. But to see it now play out in this world where it's Lex Luthor's backstory that lends itself to this idea of breaking the cycle, I thought that was, I didn't see that coming. I've loved Michael Cudlitz's Lex Luthor all along, but I was not expecting them to suddenly humanize him and suddenly put us, the viewer, in a position where you're looking at Lex going, I kind of understand you and I'm kind of rooting for you. And I kind of hope that this all does work out in your favor. This episode kind of it spinned a few things on its head, but let's go kind of piece by piece. All right. Because this episode, the big thing was Lex closing in on finding his daughter, right? Because that's been the big subplot. That aside from wanting to get revenge on Lois, ever since he got out of prison, he's been trying to find out where his daughter, Elizabeth Luthor, is. And we know that General Sam Lane, amongst the reasons that he died, was to take her location to the grave with himself. He didn't want Lex to suddenly, capture him and try to extract that information. So he knew, if I die, no one will ever know where she is. Well, apparently not. It wasn't that ironclad, Sam. Sorry, General, rest in peace. But Lois apparently knew where she was. And in this episode, Lois, has a conversation with Elizabeth. And it's all part of this very Superman-like concept of, we're going to try to fix this situation by appealing to Lex's heart over anything else. And he credits that to his mother, Martha Kent. That he said, my mom always said, sometimes the best way to reach someone is through their heart. And how heavy is that? Okay. Superman just died. Lex just created a monster that killed him. And he's threatening to ruin the lives of his wife and of his sons. And here's Clark going, let's appeal to his better nature. Let's, we're not going to be able to power our way through this. He knows he can't go toe to toe against Doomsday. He knows that we have to find another way to solve this problem. And the other way is to appeal to Lex Luthor's heart. So I thought that was a very interesting angle. And, Lois rightfully was like, are you crazy? How could we even consider such a thing? But little by little, we kind of saw this plan falling into action where Lois contacts Elizabeth. We have Clark speaking. We have Superman and Lex coming face to face, which was pretty cool. I'm not sure how many times that's happened on this series so far, where Clark in his, as Superman comes face to face with Lex. That hasn't happened much so far. So if at all. So that scene where they have the confrontation in front of Luthor's truck, I mean, that gave me a little bit of chills, honestly. Here we are, the epic rivals, the foes to the end, Lex and Superman face to face. And yet Superman was taking a tone of trying to reason with him and trying to say, there has to be another way to deal with this, because all this chaos that you're trying to wreak, it's not going to get you back those 17 years you lost with your daughter. And just trying to really speak to what's the human in there, and we got these interesting flashbacks about Lex about the human in there, where we see his ex-wife referring to him as, oh, you're still that lonely little boy from South Metropolis. And, we started kind of coloring in and finding out that he came from a home with a physically abusive father who ran out on them, and then a mother who would hit him with the father's belt. And it was just this chaos. He came from a life of pain and hell. And they suddenly, you start understanding why this Lex is so calloused and why he's got this tough exterior, because he's had to survive since moment one. It's like he's been on his own for most of his life dealing with this ugliness around him. So they found this really interesting way to kind of ground Lex's story and make you look at him like a sympathetic figure, and it all leads to this moment where we have Lex and Elizabeth finally meeting in the diner. And it's touch and go, but I got to tell you, those scenes I thought were so powerful. And honestly, thematically, it goes back to the beginning of the series. Something I used to talk about on another friend's YouTube channel when he used to do reaction shows about this series is that this show always seems to extol the virtues of talking it out. And I love that. If you pay attention in the early seasons, like in season 1, there was lots of stuff where family conflicts and things that were simmering and brewing between the Kent family, it was all brought to a head by Lois or Clark forcing the intended parties to sit and talk about the problem. I love the idea that we're in this world where you have superheroes and there are things that are larger than life, and it's a comic book world about a flying alien. But at the end of the day, the message is we save ourselves a lot of heartache and we save ourselves a lot of unnecessary challenges by just getting face to face and having tough conversations. And this episode kind of brought that back for me of just like, yeah, the writers, Todd Helding and the people running and writing this show, they want us to think of this stuff. They want us to see how important it is to have those tough conversations with people you wouldn't necessarily have wanted to speak to. People who on the surface, you would think, why would I ever give that person another shot? But that's one of the other things I love about this episode and about this series is that, for me growing up, I felt like I had to learn really young that really wonderful people can do really crappy things, and people who can seem really crappy on the surface are really just beautiful, imperfect works themselves, and they have their own stories and traumas to try to understand, and certain cycles weren't broken for them and they are just what they are, and you got to figure that out. This idea of you can't just throw someone out just because there's a bad part to them. Because here, Elizabeth gave Lex a lot of chances here. She knows that he may not have committed the crime that sent him to prison, but he's guilty of other crimes. And yet he's not guilty of being a bad father. From those flashbacks, it comes in very clear that the one thing he's cared about the most, his singular focus in his life seemingly, the only good thing to him is Elizabeth. And as a father, he was a really good father. In the scene where he goes and sits down with her in the closet and talks her through how she's feeling, in the scene where we find out that in this custody situation, she chose Lex. He didn't ask her to choose. Elizabeth chose to stay with Dad. And after him and his ex-wife have this conversation and the mom storms off, he turns away and they look at each other and he gives her like a little wink, like, I got you, kid. We did it. Which also kind of implies that maybe the ex-wife is not, the rosy dandy, damsel in distress that, other ex-wives of Lex Luthor might have been portrayed as. But it gives this impression that Elizabeth loved her father, and he may have a lot of failings, but when it came to being there for her and showing her how much he loved and cared and would do anything for her, apparently that was never in question. And it adds to the tragedy of like, he was sent away for a crime he didn't commit after his daughter took a gamble and chose him. She chose him. And after he sends her into school, he gets arrested, and now he knows that his life is ruined with her, and it puts into question what kind of a relationship he's going to be able to have with her. I mean, it really kind of shows why he does hate Lois so much and why he needs this vendetta so badly. But it's crazy because in the end, he's essentially offered what he wanted. Elizabeth offers to essentially accept him back into her life. But he has to give up this quest for vengeance. And he comes to this fork in the road, and Lex chooses the vengeance over his daughter, which is crazy. But again, it shows just what a bite of his soul those 17 years took out of him. And, I wonder if Elizabeth is going to factor in future episodes, or if this really was kind of like one and done. He had his chance, and he still chose to go through with trying to take down Lois and the Kents instead of just burying that hatchet and trying to be there with his daughter and be a grandfather to her son. So Lex, Jesus, man, you had it. You had it all. A cool thing this episode that I wanted to just point out is it was neat seeing Jonathan wearing red and blue. That's a sort of like a classic motif of having, Clark wearing red and blue colors, even going back to the original Smallville series on the CW, where Tom Welling always had some kind of blue and some kind of red worked into his upper clothing. And this episode, we got to see Jonathan with a red and blue vest. And it makes sense because now he's essentially taking on the mantle of becoming Superboy. And he's well on his way towards becoming a proper hero in this world. So it's cool having him wear the red and blue. And there were a couple of heavy points in this episode I just want to point out. Like, I loved when Elizabeth mentions something about Lex being a monster, and he says, "Do you think I am?" And she says, "I don't want to." Like that, to me that hit, because like as a father, right? Like the biggest fear I would have if something like that happened, if I got sent to prison for a thing I didn't do, I would be so worried that my daughter would think I'm that bad thing. And he asked her, "Do you think I'm that bad thing?" And she said, "I don't want to." And that means that there's a chance that she's going to give me an opportunity to change that perception. And I just, I love that sort of stuff. I think this show has such a beautiful beating heart. So far this season, this final season of the show is off to a great, we're more than halfway through now. I want things to slow down a little bit. I can't believe we're almost at the end of this journey, but it's so far every episode has hit. One thing I am just kind of curious about before I wrap up tonight is how many freaking people are going to find out about this secret. It seems like a lot of people know that Clark Kent is Superman now. And I wonder if we're going to kind of get to a point where we find out that basically all of Smallville has found out through one word or another. And they've just decided that since Clark is our boy, we are going to keep his secret. The community will keep this secret forever. I wonder if that's where we're going with all this. But either way, it's another great episode, and hopefully you enjoyed this post-show live stream. Thanks for all who participated. Ooh, I got some comments. So before I go, what do we got here? Hey, Mark. Okay, he's watching some football. That's great. Okay, hi, Conscious Evolution. Yes, I was doing 5 and 6. So earlier on, since I was talking a little bit about episode 5, I think he got a little confused there. But yes, Conscious Evolution. Since I missed last week, we got a little recap this week, okay? But, okay, so that about does it. So until next time, life is chaos. Be kind. Up, up, and away.